On our program, it says under lunch, 85 minutes, it says there may be an additional presentation on use of an electron microscope on a sample from the face of the Turin Shroud by Gerard Lucotte. Lucotte? Thank you.
Lucotte.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we've not received that, but we did receive the overall paper, and Kevin Schwenkendorf, raise your hand, Kevin, right there, thank you, has read it, and I am instructed, I'm authorized to repeat what Kevin told me, and that is, there you go, and that is that this actually was a very interesting paper, but we've not received the PowerPoint presentation for it, so it's mostly on the beautiful pictures that he's obtained. He was working with an electron microscope on 1 square millimeter. Too small for you to see, but that 1 square millimeter came from a piece of tape that was actually put down onto the face of Jesus, presumably in 1978, and that he obtained 2,500 items of interest on that 1 square millimeter of tape. So that's why I thought this would have been a very interesting presentation. But one of the primary items of interest was a piece of a hair. It looked like it had been a shaved hair, and it was identified, the color of it was blonde reddish. It's interesting in that the Quran retains evidently an oral tradition handed down that Jesus had red hair. That's also consistent with King David being called ruddy, which is very interesting. Also on that 1 square millimeter of tape, they found very small pieces of copper. Is that right, Kevin? Copper. And evidently to shave people in that day, they would make the razor out of copper. So everything is consistent with what we think this piece of cloth is. I wish we had the whole presentation, but I've just given you all that I understand about it. You can talk with Kevin here for further information on that. Right there. Thank you, Kevin. And is Russ coming? Here. There we go. Because he's supposed to be up here instead of me. I was just filling in. Yes.
So who's reading for this paper? Is this are you Mario? You are Mario. Now, Mario, you have a PhD in computer science from Montreal, correct? And he also hosts 2 websites, syndenology.org, and there's one in French, but you don't need that one. And it's and he's going to be presenting who saw the Mandylion and what was its size. And so, without any further ado, you have yourself set up here?
I think so. Yeah, it's there.
I think you're set.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the introduction. So, I'm not going to speak too loud because I have a microphone. All right. I'm used to speak loud because when I used to teach, there was this big amphitheater and I had to speak very loud without a microphone. So, my name is Mario Latendresse, and I work as a computer scientist in Silicon Valley. What I do is computer simulation of bacteria and other kind of things like that. Chemoinformatics and bioinformatics are my field of research. So, of course, here we're talking about history, mostly. Nothing to do with computer science. But I took 2 specific questions. Who saw the Mandylion? And what was its size, the size of the Mandylion? But just to try to answer such questions, you have to really go through many details. Of course, here we won't go through all the details to try to fully answer these questions, but we'll actually see what other specialists did say about it. And also, I'm going to show something special. I have some reproduction here of the Shroud, and we're going to do some experiment, very fast physical experiment, where I'm going to play the role of Abgar, the Legion of Abgar. I'm going to play Abgar. Although I won't put any beard on, that's for sure. So the overview of what I'm going to do a quick introduction to the Mandylion, what it is, if you've never heard of it. Right now you have actually Emanuela Marinelli just did a presentation about the Mandylion, so you already know what it is. It's supposed to be a cloth with an image of Christ on it. But which image exactly? That's another question. Then researchers are against the idea of Mandylion equal Shroud of Turin. Actually, many specialists are against this idea. Many specialists who have studied the Mandylion will shout out loud, this is not true, this is not possible. So we'll mention some of those, and these people have to be studied. What do they have to say against that? Introduction to the Legend of Abgar. Legend of Abgar is something very complex. We'll go quickly through it, but to give you an idea what it is. And also the Mandylion in Constantinople. So the Mandylion was in Constantinople for over 2 centuries. And finally, and that's probably something that is not discussed very often, but people that talk about the Mandylion, but the Mandylion, I believe, and many people think so, that it reached the Sainte-Chapelle of Paris. So it's actually a very important phase inside the history of the Mandylion. The Mandylion was at the Sainte-Chapelle of Paris. But what can we learn from the Sainte-Chapelle of Paris? We'll talk about this a little bit in this presentation. I have actually a much longer presentation after dinner tonight where I'm going to talk about this, about the Mandylion at the Sainte-Chapelle. So it's going to be a quick introduction to the Mandylion at the Sainte-Chapelle. So what is the Mandylion? Well, it's supposed to be a cloth impressed with a miraculous image of Christ. And most often we see it as a face, not the whole body. It's always the face that is represented on the Mandylion. Actually, some researchers think even it's probably a wooden icon. Some researchers thought it's probably that, but it's an extreme point of view. The Mandylion, it's a term mostly used when it was in Constantinople. Before that, the Mandylion was in Edessa. So we call it the image of Edessa. And also, most researchers stated that the Mandylion was brought to the Sainte-Chapelle of Paris. And also they said it was destroyed there during the French Revolution. I believe it was brought to the Sainte-Chapelle, but I do not think it was destroyed there. It disappeared from the Sainte-Chapelle. So people that are against the idea that the Mandylion is the Shroud of Turin, Avril Cameron, when she did her inaugural lecture as professor of ancient history at King's College in 1980, so right after Jan Wilson published his work that the Mandylion was probably the Shroud of Turin, she said, no, that's not possible. And she was really against that. Also, Andrea Nicolotti is an Italian historian, researcher, and he actually worked in Torino. He's totally against this idea, of course, and he wrote a book, a complete book on this idea that the Shroud of Turin cannot be the Mandylion. And many others are against this idea. Sébastien Brock, Yannick Durand, Bernard Flusen, Stephen Runciman, Gerhard Wolff, they have arguments against this idea. But I think that what is missing in their arguments is that at the Sainte-Chapelle of Paris, I do not think it was destroyed there, because their main argument is that the Mandylion was destroyed at the Sainte-Chapelle, so for them it cannot be the Shroud of Turin. So other people that said that, so some people that did say specifically what I just said, you've got Stephen Runciman said, okay, the Mandylion reached the Sainte-Chapelle, but in the end, it was destroyed there during the French Revolution in 1792. Also, another person, I probably mentioned her name, pronounced her name incorrectly, Saïsi Godrang-Enberg. She actually wrote, the Mandylion, is named in the list of relics ceded to Saint Louis. Saint Louis was king of France, from where it disappeared in 1792. And you can name many other people that said exactly the same thing. Okay, so that's the overall picture of the Mandylion. The Mandylion, the way it moved throughout times. Actually, this is here a presentation of the evolution of the Legend of Abgar. So if you never heard of the Legend of Abgar, it's a complex, we could study that for hours, but the Legend of Abgar really evolved through times, and it's a very quick presentation of this evolution. So the first, I would say the first historical document that we have about the legend of Abgar, it has nothing to do with an image. It has to do with a letter of Christ, a letter that was sent from Abgar to Christ. And Abgar is asking help from Christ to be healed. Okay? And so this is the 4th century. And then you have an evolution. Then the Doctrina of Adai mentions a painted image. It's in the 5th or the 4th of the 5th century. It's written in Syriac. So we're starting to have an image being mentioned in the legend of Abgar. And then the next step is actually a miraculous image. So in the Acts of Thaddeus, or Adai, a miraculous picture on a cloth is mentioned. And actually that's the first, I would say, witness of potentially what the Mandylion was. It is described as a tetradiplon, which means like a cloth that is folded in 4 and double layer. So it looks like it's large. So it's the first witness that contradicts actually what we think of the Mandylion, which is a small piece of cloth. And eventually it is transferred to Constantinople. And then I mentioned here the narratio. Narratio is a document that described the Mandylion when it was in Edessa. So it's a very important document written around 1945. And then we have the Crusader that takes Constantinople in 1204, and eventually the Mandylion is transferred to the Sainte Chapelle with all the relics that was in the Imperial Chapel. So I'm going to go through the legend of Abgar through this using this manuscript. So this manuscript is actually in New York. As you can see, it's a roll, and it presents the legend of Abgar. It has been dated in the 14th century. And what's very interesting on this manuscript is that you have 21 miniatures that were drawn by some artists and present the Mandylion. And what I want to say with this manuscript is that it's almost certain, I would say it's certain, that the artists that draw the Mandylion on this manuscript never saw the Mandylion. That's almost for sure. Because it was done in the 14th century when the Mandylion disappeared from Constantinople, and the person who did it was far away potentially from Constantinople. So this is actually an interesting. So actually, the physical appearance of this manuscript is that one side you have got skin, and on the skin side, so it's all written in Greek, and then when you turn it over, it's the air side of the manuscript. It's a parchemin. And on the air side, it's a translation of the Greek and Arabic. And on that side, you actually have the date of the production of the roll. So we know pretty sure when this was created. And I'm going to go through the legend of Abgar through this, using this manuscript. It's actually, of course, a bit damaged, so it's not easy to see the picture. But the first step in the legend of Abgar is that Abgar, which is actually seated there, is a king of the 1st century. And so it's the time of Christ. And he's sending Ananias to Christ with a letter, and that letter simply says, it's in bold there, I am sick, please come to see me and heal me. That's the main theme of the legend of Abgar. And then so Ananias reached Christ in Jerusalem, gives the letter to Christ, and then sends back a letter. Christ himself write a letter and says, actually, I cannot really go, but I will send some of my disciples to heal you, and so on and so forth. So Christ then gives the letter to Ananias. Ananias goes back to Abgar, and Abgar is not really happy with that, and so he actually sends a painter. He sends a painter to Christ, and the painter is supposed to draw the form or the face of Christ, but actually Christ realized that he cannot do it properly, so he take a cloth and press himself on the cloth and give that to the painter, and the painter goes back to Abgar, present the miraculous image, and instantly, miraculously, Abgar is healed. That's the whole story of the legend of Abgar. I did skip a few things, but that's essentially it. So we've got an idea here that it seems that the Mandylion is mixed with the legend of Abgar. Of course, it's a legend, has evolved with time. In my opinion, is that the legend of Abgar was actually influenced by the Mandylion, not the other way around. It's not the Mandylion that created the legend of Abgar. The legend of Abgar was modified with time to introduce the miraculous image of the Mandylion. And, well, there's several opinions about that, but I think it's, some expert did say that. So, and here we kind of start answering the question, what's the size of the Mandylion? So a number of later, so if you read this text, it's actually from Irma Karolashvili, and she published several papers about the Mandylion. And one thing she said essentially is that all these documents that we have, these often differ from each other, and instead of shedding additional light on the issue, they present an even more complicated picture. The majority of early Syriac or Syriac-based sources do not provide any description of the image and mainly refer to it simply as the image icon of Christ and Edessa without any reference to its form. It's true that when you start studying everything around the Mandylion, you kind of have a complex picture that never really states what it is. So it remains undetermined. We don't know its size. We're not sure if the full body of Christ is on it, only the face. We're not sure from these documents. Other statement you can see here from the same author, like you see here, the first one, as is evident from the iconographic material. Iconographic material is all the representation of the Mandylion. Universally accepted representation of the relic never seems to have existed. Other statement, it was entirely a pictorial construct that has nothing to do with the Edessa relic itself. So what it says here is simply that all these artistic representations we see of the Mandylion do not really represent the Mandylion because we didn't have access to it. And so on and so forth. There's actually another statement, statement number 3 is very interesting. It actually comes from Herbert Kessler because she's quoting Herbert Kessler. He says that Kessler thinks that all the Mandylion we see are cli piata. Cli piata is like a rounded circle where we represent the protagonist, the person we're talking about. So the Cleopatra was indeed a device used by Byzantine artists to represent a scene that was very complex, but instead of putting the real people, they will put a Cleopatra, put the person inside of it and say, oh, that person is over there, or that person is over here. It's almost the same thing that is used by the Mandylion. We see the Mandylion, we see the cloth, but we see a Cleopatra on it, which says there's an image in it, but what you see is not the real thing. It's a mechanism used by the Byzantines. So the last statement here, any attempt to reconstruct the plausible original feature of the Edison image seems to be an impossible task. And these people have studied the Mandylion, all the transcription and everything, and that's their conclusion. And I think it makes sense. So the next step is, so the image of Edessa eventually was taken by force in Edessa and was moved to Constantinople. That happened under the Emperor Romanos Lecapenus, and it was done, and it arrived in Constantinople on August 15, 945. Now, when it arrived there's an historian, his name is John Skilitzes, wrote an history, and later on in Sicily, an artist created miniatures of that history, over 500 miniatures, and one of them is this one here. And we see Romanos Lecapenus, the emperor, the Byzantine emperor, receiving the Mandylion. And you can see the Mandylion is very small. And it's white with a face, but obviously you can see right away, with simple argument, that the artist never saw the Mandylion, that's for sure. You can see that Romanos and the image on the Mandylion is the same face. So he never saw it. And it was done in the 12th century, this miniature, and that person is in Sicily. You cannot have seen the Mandylion. So it's done through the legend of Abgar. So most representations of the Mandylion are based on the legend of Abgar. Here's an interesting, this has been shown several times. It's actually an icon that is in the monastery of Saint Catherine and Sinai. And then we can see here, actually it's Constantine VII, because Constantine VII took power in Byzantine in 945, and we can see it's Constantine VII playing the role of Abgar, and he's holding the Mandylion. So actually, what's very interesting about this this icon is that the artist who did it is probably the closest artist that could have seen the Mandylion, because it's Constantine VII. It's at the same time of Constantine VII, so the artist could have been told, or he could have seen the Mandylion. Probably not the image, but the Mandylion itself. It's possible. And it's very interesting if you do a zoom and you look at his hand, the hand of Abgar, which actually is the hand of Constantine VII, it looks like it's thick. The cloth is not very thin, it's thick. And I'm going to play a little bit the role of Abgar here. I have a very thin piece of linen here, almost the same size as what you see there. If you try to hold it this way, what does happen? Doesn't look like it. Everything is sagging on the side. Even if you do that and you try to lift it like him, eventually what happens? It goes down. Physically, if the person knew what it looks like and draw this, it cannot be that. It has to be this. This is the same size of the Shroud of Turin, folded, of course. You hold it, and then, of course, you can obtain something like this. So the shroud, the Mandylion that we see there looks like it's something folded and thick, with the hand like this. So this image here, if we interpret it as physically correct, and we say, oh, it's a very small piece of cloth, well, actually, it has to be thick if you hold it that way. Another thing is that, whoops, coming up, no, whoops, I'm going too fast. Sorry. Okay, so one thing that's very interesting, this is, again, Herbert Kessler that writes that, and essentially he wants to say it's a Cleopatra that we probably have here. Because if you look carefully at the image, the portrait, it does not follow any wrinkle of the cloth. So it looks like a tag on top of it, a tag almost like a tag that tells you this is what's inside. And indeed, the paper essentially says that. He wrote it says the picture is probably inside, not outside. Another statement here here we are in Constantinople, and I'm going to talk about the Narratio. And the Narratio, which was a document commanded by Constantine VII, Constantine VII seems to send the message that the image was never seen in Edessa. Nobody could see it except the high priest. And here we have a text translated from Greek that describe the feast or the liturgy of the Mandylion at the church of Saint Sophie in Edessa, and how the Edessan image was shown. Actually, it was never shown. So so at Lent, so you can see on bold the text here, the Aeroproitos image, which is the image of Edessa, wrapped in a white linen. So the whole Mandylion was wrapped in white linen, was placed in honor on the throne that had been prepared for it. The throne was carried out in a solemn procession, okay? After the celebration of the Holy Liturgy, only the high priest was allowed to approach the divine image, to revere it and to kiss it. So only the high priest can approach it. And then later on, we'll describe many things, everybody was able to see the chest from a distance, but nobody was allowed to approach and touch it. The chest is the chest where the cloth was put into it. So it was never shown publicly, nobody could approach it, and so essentially not many people could see it. It starts answering the fact that not many people could see the image of Edessa. And indeed, what Constantine VII does in Constantinople, he decides to put the Mandylion in the chest and in the reliquary, lock it and put it into the Pharaoh's chapel, and nobody can approach it. Nobody. Only the high priest maybe could see it, and the emperor could see it. So that means that up to almost the sack of Constantinople, very few people could see the Mandylion. So it's another statement by an expert on a specialist on Mandylion, Kurt Wiesman. He writes here, this image, the Mandylion, exists in a considerable number of copies, but what did it look like? And then he goes on to say that Duptius, which actually compile all miraculous images and all texts about miraculous images, so an expert is a German expert in history of miraculous images, assume that the various representations of the Mandylion, which differ considerably from each other, are ultimately not based on an autopsy of the famous relic, which apparently was very rarely to be seen. So we kind of answer here one of the questions. It was rarely seen. The Mandylion was rarely seen. Here I go to the Sainte-Chapelle. I still have 5 minutes. So the Sainte-Chapelle, so eventually what happened is that the Mandylion, actually 22 relics were transferred from Constantinople to Paris, the Sainte-Chapelle of Paris. It was done in 3 different transfers. And this happened between 1239 to 1242. And this is Saint Louis who actually bought the relics from his cousin, because his cousin was actually emperor of Constantinople after the sack of Constantinople. You see, this is after the sack of Constantinople. And then you receive all these relics. The list of full relics is here. There are 22 of them. The first one is actually the crown of thorns. And then you got the true piece of the cross, a piece of the true cross, etc. And then number 8, Sanctam Tuelam Tabula Incertam. What is very interesting here is if you look at all the relics, they all have a function. The crown of thorns, we know what that is. The true cross, we know what that is. The lance that pierced Christ, we know what that is. But when you reach item 8, no function is described. Sanctam Tuelam means holy cloth inserted in a table, in a box. And it says almost nothing. So what does that mean? It means that this object, they didn't know, Baudouin didn't know what it was, and the king didn't know what it was, the canon of Sainte-Chapelle didn't know what it was. Actually, they did not analyze it carefully. So they received one of the relics among 22, and they pay no attention to it, essentially. They don't actually unfold it or look at it, nothing. So just put there, and so it's put in the Sainte-Chapelle, and actually you can see here the place where it was put. If you go to the Sainte-Chapelle, you can see that inside. You've got a high platform, which is behind the altar, but the altar does not exist anymore because the Sainte-Chapelle is no longer a church. It's a museum now. And there was a big baldaquin, and there was what we call the Grande Chasse, and the 22 relics were put in there. Among them, the holy cloth. What was put in there. So you can already see what I'm going to say is that if you look at all the inventories in the Sainte-Chapelle, you realize that the holy cloth is what? Is the Mandylion. Because the reliquary is described, and the reliquary of the holy cloth has a face of Christ in it. And actually it has this size. You know, if you look at the inventories of the Sainte-Chapelle, it gives you the size of the reliquary. And it's about this depth. And it's exactly the size to put the cloth that I had in my hand, which is a reproduction of the Holy Shroud, the Shroud. So, and typically a reliquary is big enough to contain the object that it's supposed to contain. It's not supposed to have lots of space around it, usually, typically. And so putting a small cloth into this is a bit ridiculous. It has to be big. That's a simple, observation that it was not a small cloth. So I kind of answered the question, what's the size of the Mandylion? Well, when you look at the old documents, it looks like it's small, looks like it's big, but when they arrive at Sainte-Chapelle, it looks like it's big. It's a big cloth. It's not a small one. So last thing, I have 2 minutes. Last thing, Jan Wilson proposed the idea that the Mandylion was shown face only. That's why we have all these artistic representation. I think this is not the case. Because when the Mandylion arrives at the Sainte-Chapelle, It is described, as you saw, as an holy cloth, and no image is mentioned. How come? How can they receive a full cloth, and let's suppose there's an image on it you can see directly? They should have mentioned the image. But it's not directly mentioned here. It is mentioned, but it is mentioned on the reliquary, not on the cloth. So they do not see the image. They have the cloth, they do not see the image. What does it mean? You can imagine many things. Is it flip over? Is it folded? So I think it's folded. And so it's never shown with the face only, because we have document that tells us from the Sainte-Chapelle that you cannot see any image on it. Thank you.
You are on time.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Okay, so that is a fascinating topic, you know, the whole Mandylion. Now, for the interview, you saw my presentation. There's a lot of different names for this. The image of Edessa, the Mandylion, the true likeness, the image not made by human hands. And I usually refer to it as the true likeness, just so if there's any confusion between what I said last night versus what was said just now. Often referred to as the Mandylion, but, you know, since there are different ways of referring to it, for me, I prefer just calling it the true likeness. So, but that's just me. So, well, thank you very much. Now, so did you grab your flash drive out of here?
Actually, it's my computer.
That's your computer. Okay, so no wonder. So. Oh, by the way, OJ was paroled, and so he'll be on the loose probably in October sometime. So, now, you want to know? You ever heard of one of the shortest books ever written? It's written by O.J. Simpson. It's called "My Plan to Find the Real Killers." Well, we're kind of moving. We don't really have time, so we just got to move along. So we have. Do you have that flash drive from Jack?
I do not.
Jack, where are you? There he is. We're going to get his flash drive up and ready here.